All right. Good morning and welcome, everyone. A special welcome to those of you who have just recently arrived here at Kansas State University. But we're also happy if you have been with us for more than a semester and are here today as well. It's great to see you, and we are really glad to have you here in Manhattan. Today's workshop is focusing on sort of the key aspects that relate to getting acclimated or getting used to American graduate level writing. So we're going to cover a lot today, but it's meant to kind of get you started on this path of becoming more comfortable with the writing that you're going to be doing in your graduate programs and helping you to kind of set yourself up for success early on in your careers, which can be a really great kind of opportunity to propel you forward and to continue to improve beyond today. If you have not already done so, you can find a printout sheet of the same QR code and a link, or you can scan it here. This will set you up with a connection to the Dropbox folder where you can access and download the presentation slides for today. You will also see a few additional resources, some that we will discuss during today's session, and some that you can take with you and use beyond as you're looking for additional tips and tricks and resources. So feel free to take a look at it now, and there are kind of some sheets floating around, so you'll get a chance to do so later as well. All right. I wanted to get us started today by kind of thinking about what it means to write, what it means to write as an academic, as a graduate student. In particular, I would love to think a little bit about how writing can be considered a cultural action. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute, but first I would love for you to take just a minute to think about a few traits or characteristics that you feel you have as a writer that is kind of personal to your style, it is unique to you, it is sort of how you come across. It's what makes people say, that's his writing, that's her writing, that's their writing. So for example, I tend to write in fairly long sentences. I really like putting lots of different pieces of ideas together. My sentences tend to be on the longer side, and I often have to cut that down. That's a personal style. I'd also like you to think about a characteristic of your native written language that is common across the writers within that culture as well. So two kind of different approaches to think about this. I'll give you a minute just to kind of reflect on this, see if you can come up with a few things for each. And then I'll have you share with some of the people around you. Take a minute, reflect. So hopefully some things are starting to come to mind, particularly in regards to the second prompt here. Maybe you're thinking about the ways that you are describing your native language to other people who aren't aware of it or who are learning that language. So what do you kind of talk about? So something to consider as we kind of ponder these two concepts is that writing really is a cultural action. That is, it is specific to a lot of different factors that make up a person's origin, culture, and it reflects in how we communicate to other people. And that is not something that carries forth to everybody. And so if you're thinking about your native language, are there things that come to mind for you that make your native language strong, effective, that make people good communicators? So kind of building off of those first two prompts, I'd like you to take a minute to think about writing in your native language. What are those characteristics of good writing? So in your language, what makes that writing really strong and effective? How is it organized? What type of word choices tend to work really effectively? And then I'd like you to compare that to your exposure to American writing, sort of how things might have felt different, anything you might have been surprised by or didn't know. And once you've thought about that, I would love for you to turn to some of the people around you, introduce yourselves, and maybe share and compare. What you're going to find is that there are a lot of different cultural reflections of writing here in the room today. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to kind of think and then turn and say hello to everybody and sort of talk about your native language and how it works with written communication. Let you get started.
Trying to make meaning out of what I'm writing. Because in the explanation, you might just give I'm from Nigeria, for example. So when you begin to see the types of food, the clothing, the everything, you begin to relate it to the customer. So, well, absolutely, the way you write as well, trying to give information, to full detail about it, that's also excellent. Someone like me, that's why we're here. What's the idea?
All right, I'm gonna bring everybody back to the front of the room. I always love overhearing this particular conversation because you hear just how many different wonderful diverse experiences are here in this room that we get to benefit from here at K-State. But I hope you're also hearing as well that really there is a very huge cultural component to writing. There is no one universally correct way to write. And so it's a cultural action that reflects a lot of who you are, where you come from, and what the expectations are within that culture that you are either born into or adopted into, etc. So what we are trying to emphasize here is, and kind of give you a little bit of an insight into today, is to what the American cultural writing expectations are. And I'm using American specifically because English language obviously is present in a lot of different countries. Even as a native Canadian, I see differences as I navigate things like spelling in American writing. So I'm going to be very specific here about American English and American academic English in this presentation today. But what you'll notice, and this is how I would describe it to other people who ask me, American writing tends to emphasize things like clarity and directness, sort of getting to the point, being efficient with your writing style. It also prioritizes being reader friendly. That is, it's set up to make the process of reading as easy as possible for that audience. And it's not necessarily about reflecting with a lot of depth or complexity the skills of the writer themselves. Writing isn't meant to be a puzzle the reader has to figure out. And so, yes, we emphasize things like grammar, and as I'm sure you've encountered, grammar is important and is a big hurdle in getting used to writing academically in English. But there are a lot of other different things going on as well. It's not just about grammar. It's about recognizing some different cultural expectations that we have for organization, form, development. And those are things that you can learn as you immerse yourself in the language here. So what we're going to try and focus on today is quite a few different topics, a lot of them really big, and we could kind of talk for hours about each one. So we're going to kind of cover the basics today so you feel like you're set up for success. We're going to kind of outline some of the most common challenges that multilingual learners face when they're trying to figure out what is expected of them with American academic writing. We are going to introduce some strategies for things like clarity, because that's a really, really big kind of cultural expectation of our writing. We are going to talk about some additional resources so that you know what else is out there and available to you both here on campus and online. And then we're going to kind of pan out and talk a little bit about writing practice, which means how you write, how you go about and set up a habit that keeps you writing effectively and consistently. And then I'll also tell you a little bit about the Writing Center and how we can help you through this too. So the first thing we're going to focus on is writing with clarity. This is kind of the key to strong writing. And this is sort of the thing that impacts all the other pieces of writing in academia. Now, this is a challenge for a lot of English language learners like you, as in clarity is a cultural concept that you have to start figuring out, but there are a lot of things that go into making writing clear. So what you'll see here is a list of some of the things that are challenging for English language learners. You'll hear the phrases active voice and passive voice talked about a lot. And it's something that I find English language learners actually know a lot about, because it's something you hear in your language classes, things like that. You might even be more aware of it than native speakers. But figuring out how to make that choice is challenging. Which one do we use? It's also difficult to create sentence level clarity when you have to talk about really complex topics, and when you are working on your own research, which is very complex and has a lot of disciplinary terminology. It's hard to kind of handle all that and work with the basics of the English language. The other main challenge that we find in academia is trying to figure out how to talk about research, how to become part of that research conversation where you get to present your ideas, but also have to think about the way that you talk about ideas from other people. So what we also find is that master's students, PhD students typically have a pretty strong vocabulary. You have been learning our language that way really effectively, but it's hard to build an academic vocabulary. That is, language and word choices that we typically use in just academic settings as opposed to social settings. So figuring out what type of language we're using is kind of the key here. You're going to hear a lot of people focus on things like grammar and kind of reduce all the struggles you're dealing with down to things like grammar, punctuation, spelling. And I feel like that is a bad thing because it's, again, focusing on just small details when overall clarity of expression and organization are really what's more impactful. But unfortunately, a lot of academics, especially native English speakers, don't understand that challenge as well. And so they might be giving you a message that you need to focus on grammar when in fact there are other things that you should be working on first. We're going to try and give you some strategies to combat all of these challenges today. So a quick note before we dive into a lot of the more specific suggestions. We talked about how writing is culturally specific. It's important to kind of make note too that the discipline that you are joining here at K-State also has some expectations and some norms and some kind of rules around writing. So if you're ever in doubt or if you want to kind of learn more about what writing looks like in your field, ask your professors, ask your advisors, ask your colleagues, and kind of start learning what writing looks like in your field. They're usually really happy to show you samples of what good writing looks like. There are a lot of differences right down to things like a preference for active voice, passive voice, formatting and structure. So the rules and kind of strategies I'm going to show you are fairly broad, but you might find more specific advice from people inside your department. Okay, so we're going to talk first about the really, really nitty gritty, I would say kind of the more boring stuff, and then we're going to pan out to the more interesting things. But it's really important to talk about active and passive voice because the way you make a choice for one over the other does impact the way you write in general. Most academic writing today in the US typically focuses on active voice and is emphasizing that this is the pattern that you should be typically using if you can. The reason that we emphasize active voice is because it's easier to be clear and it is easier to reduce your word count. That is, active voice tends to use fewer words than passive voice does. The other thing that we think about as researchers is that active voice tends to emphasize who is doing that research, who is going through the data, who is presenting the results, which means that you as the researcher are more prominent. You can take ownership and authorship of your ideas more easily when you use active voice. And it's easier to establish yourself in the conversation. And I'll show you some examples of that so you can see what I mean. That said, a lot of STEM fields in particular are still wrestling with this question, whether we always use active voice, whether we still have a place for passive voice, things like that. But I'm going to show you a little bit about what it looks like. Active voice tends to reduce your word count, tends to be a little bit easier to read. Passive voice needs to be a conscious choice. That is, you are making a specific choice in a paragraph or a sentence to use passive voice for a specific reason. In most other cases, using active voice is preferred. So you'll see up on the screen here, there are some examples of what this means, just so you have a refresher and a reminder of what these two concepts are. So the first example here says, the boy ate the apple. We could rewrite that sentence and say, the apple was eaten by the boy. So the first example is the use of active voice. So the action is clearly kind of happening, but we're focusing more on the person who is doing the acting. The boy is kind of the focus of this sentence here. In the second example, we have passive voice. And the emphasis in that sentence is more on the thing that is experiencing that action, which is the apple in this case. So the apple was eaten by the boy. So you see how active voice and passive voice tend to prioritize different things and make different things the focus. You'll see a couple of other examples in more research contexts. 4 members of the nursing staff observed the hand washing practices of staff during rostered shifts. That's active voice. Passive voice is the hand washing practices of staff were observed by 4 members of the nursing staff during rostered shifts. So you'll notice that the first example makes it more visible who is doing the observations, who's collecting the information in this process. The second version makes the data, the results, the thing being observed more of the focus of the sentence. So you see just how much the emphasis can change. In STEM fields, we sometimes make a conscious choice to use passive voice because we care more about what's happening inside the experiment. We care more about the data or the thing that is being experimented with than we care about the people who are conducting the experiments. So you'll hear, especially in STEM fields, maybe a preference for passive voice in certain circumstances. But that said, we do see more of a shift in preference for active voice, even in those settings. So essentially, what I am advocating for is that you try and make your writing most consistently in active voice. And when you feel like it is important and necessary, to switch to passive voice. And ask people around you, because you'll find there's some strong opinions about this. But we tend to prefer active because it's easier to read and it uses fewer words, which is typically a bonus in American level reading. There's some other types of things you can do inside your sentences that are going to tackle some of the biggest challenges to clarity. So another thing you can work on is trying to make sure that the verbs of your sentences are early on in the sentence. That way, it's more likely that the action of the sentence, which is where the verb kind of contains, is more easily locatable by the reader, and they can kind of use it to interpret the rest of the sentence more easily. And so we try and put the verb early, and we try and keep it really closely alongside the subject of a sentence. So the person that is completing the action. So just to kind of show you what that looks like in academic writing, I have two examples. The first one shows you what happens when you push a verb of your sentence all the way near the end. So it says, borehole logs summarizing the geotechnical field investigation, including soil classification, groundwater observations, and moisture content determination, can be found in Appendix D, borehole logs. So the verb I've highlighted in blue. So what you'll notice if you're reading this sentence is that you have to get through this really long list of stuff, of terminology, before you know what you're supposed to do with it. And you're supposed to know that all of these things are, can be found in this appendix. And so it takes a long time to understand and interpret all this information if we don't have that verb helping us along the way. So we look for revisions like this, where we just take that verb and we try and move it closer to the beginning of the sentence. So the revision sounds like this. Borehole logs in Appendix D summarize the geotechnical field investigation, including, and then we have our list of things. So because that verb is so important in helping us interpret what the sentence is all about, we try and place it early if we can. So that's one strategy that I recommend for the revision process. So when you already have some writing and you're trying to make it better, go through and look and see where your verbs are. And if you see opportunities to move verbs closer to the beginning of your sentence, you're doing a really kind of awesome thing to make the writing a little bit more clear, just with kind of that one technique. So these two strategies, active voice, passive voice, and then thinking a little bit about your verbs, have a lot to do with clarity. And just those two things alone can do a lot to make sure that you are achieving those clarity expectations that we have in American academic writing. But then we have the big kind of questions about improving grammar and punctuation. What I tend to say at this stage in your careers, as you're getting started, is that grammar really does require a lot of practice. And it will likely at some point in your graduate careers involve a good editor, and that's okay. Even our native English speakers here on campus will utilize editors at some point during the process to help them with their writing. So it's something that you will not necessarily pick up on in this first semester, but that if you are setting up a habit of practicing, kind of testing out your grammar skills, reading, and taking a closer look at some of these expectations on a regular basis, you will start to build that competency and become better at employing the rules of grammar that we have. So some ways to do that is to read your writing out loud whenever you are revising and trying to kind of make your papers better. For some reason, it's easier to hear mistakes, to hear when something doesn't sound quite right than it is to see it on a computer screen or on print. Get in the habit and feel comfortable asking for feedback at every stage of the writing process. So when you are early, talk through your ideas with somebody. When you have a couple of drafts or early drafts on paper, ask somebody to kind of give you some feedback, and then ask people near the end of the writing stage to kind of give you some suggestions. What I have done here on this slide, there's a link, and then I've also attached a PDF version to that Dropbox that I shared with you, is a rundown of some of the most common grammar mistakes that English language learners struggle with and some suggestions. So it's a really nice little brush up to a resource to take a look through and glance at, kind of see which ones you tend to struggle with. So know that that's something that you have available to you after today's session. And then, as I've already mentioned, hiring an editor might be the way to go, especially as you start preparing to complete your dissertation. The Writing Center does not provide like editing services, but we can connect you to people who will do that for you. And we know some really great people here in town. Early on, if you're looking for feedback, your colleagues, your professors, and the Writing Center are happy to be those people that can read your writing and give you some suggestions. Okay, so we've talked about all the little stuff, things that are going to take time, but that we're going to prioritize some of those things as you get started in your writing careers here. The next topic I want to focus on is entering into the research conversation. So this is another challenge for English language learners, trying to figure out how to talk about research and also to be a researcher who is talking about their ideas. Academic writing really requires a really in-depth understanding of what people in your field are saying about your topic. And so that is why we do things like literature reviews. We kind of look at what other researchers have investigated about the topic you're interested in, and we have to kind of figure out where our ideas fit in. As a writer, you have to be able to clearly articulate how you are contributing to that conversation that other researchers are having, how you are offering new ideas, continuing moving forward the conversation, bringing something that might be a little bit different and that some people haven't done before. That's a challenge. So what I recommend is, actually I'll go back here just so you can see it, is this book. This is the one that I give out to my international students more than anything else. It's called They Say, I Say, and it is the best resource I have found that talks about how you figure out how to talk about research. It uses clear language, really helpful examples that international students can even benefit from. And it has templates, that is some examples of how to talk about research that you can try putting into your own writing. It gives you some suggestions for how to summarize what other people are saying, how to write for specific disciplines, how to respond to objections or people asking you about your ideas and challenging your ideas, and kind of bringing all that into a dissertation or an article. Writers can really easily utilize these things. And I'm going to show you a few of the key points. What the book They Say, I Say recommends is that you really want to start splitting what you're talking about in research between the concept of what other people are saying about your topic and what you are saying about your topic. And so the they say part is where you are demonstrating an awareness of what the field of research on your topic has already discussed. So when you talk about other articles, other studies, other experiments that relate to the topic that you're interested in. Depending on your discipline, we do this with a literature review, or we just do this in the introductions of papers to talk about how our research fits into what other people have discussed. So that's the they say part. I say part is where you contribute new ideas to the conversation. This is where you move forward with new ideas, new questions, new results, things that other people haven't discussed before. And so you have to balance these two things when you write academically. And so the book, They Say, I Say, offers kind of 3 simple ways to kind of consider how we do this. What they suggest is that when you talk about research, you can then agree with it. You can confirm that somebody else's ideas are true. And so you will talk about those ideas and you will agree. And that will be how you discuss the research and the writing you're doing. Another approach is a little bit more complex. You might agree with that research that somebody else has already discussed, and you also want to offer kind of a slightly new perspective. It's not a disagreement, it's not a challenge, but it's something new. So in that research conversation, you are agreeing with what they say, but you are also offering a slight difference and something new to consider. And then the big one, the more controversial one, is where you disagree with what other researchers have said, and you would suggest that. But then you offer your disagreement, your reasons, and your ideas. And those three things are a very simple way of kind of summing up basically what's happening in a research conversation. This is how we are working with ideas, and this is how we move our own ideas into the conversation as well. So let's kind of take a look at a couple simple examples. This is pulled from that book, so you can kind of see what they suggest. So very simple sentences that demonstrate what this looks like. When you agree with other research, you would mention it. He argues that this is what's happening, and I agree because. So I'm also providing my own interpretation in my discussion. So the first part of this sentence is what they say. The second part of the sentence is what I say. We agree with a difference by saying something like, her argument that this is happening out there in the world is supported by my new research that shows that. So they say, I say. If we disagree, we would mention, by focusing on, this particular aspect of their topic, this author overlooks the deeper problem of this. So what they say, what I say. So the pattern is kind of repeated whenever we kind of figure out how to talk about our ideas. It just depends on how we are interpreting that research that makes the change within a sentence. Now, what you also might be noticing in those examples is that there are a few words that tend to get used a lot in American academic English that are talking about sort of how we're interpreting the research itself. These are what is known as attributory tags or clarifying words. These are words that we attach to our research conversation that are showing readers how we're interpreting that information and how we're trying to present it to you. And so what you want to do is think about what that vocabulary looks like and get better at utilizing it yourself. A lot of faculty in the US sort of talk about how things they observe with English language learners when they write is that it's hard to understand what they're saying about their own research or what they're saying about the research of other people. And it's often because they don't have the right vocabulary to describe what they're reading. It's not that ELL writers don't understand the research, it's that they're struggling to figure out how to kind of use the right words to describe it. And so we typically develop strong vocabulary as international students about, keywords in our discipline. We know those pieces of terminology pretty well, but we also want to start getting more comfortable using clarifying words, words that are part of research conversations that help signal to the reader whether you're summarizing a source, whether you are pointing out a specific idea, whether you're disagreeing with something that you have read, basically how you are interpreting a source. And we're going to take a look at this and see how it works. So just to kind of show you some examples of what this means, I've provided a list of typical attributory tags or clarifying words that you're going to see a lot of. So for example, we have little phrases that are clarifying or framing research ideas. So you might use words like Spell argues, Sandel notes, Liu confirms, Gates emphasizes, etc. So notice here the verb is really important, and the verb is kind of signaling to the reader what you're doing with that piece of research and how you're describing it. Signal phrases clarify and frame your own ideas as well. So some samples of ways we can talk about our own research would be the second column on the right here. This paper addresses by using this method to examine this thing over here. I argue that, for example, on the other hand. So these are phrases that we would put into our writing that are kind of telling people how we're moving through our ideas and what we want you to get from those ideas as well. So kind of learning to recognize that language in other people's writing is a really important first step. and then trying to implement some of these phrases really carefully into your own writing will help you to kind of be more clear about how you are working through the research conversation. So we're going to get a little bit of practice with this, just so that you can kind of see a little bit of the techniques that the book suggests, get a chance to talk to each other and kind of chat a little bit about things. So for this activity, we're just going to take a little bit of time to walk through it together. We're going to look at two differing views of a very non-scholarly conversation. So I came up with two articles that talk about something that's not academic, but we're going to kind of use this as practice to think about how we talk about ideas. I have some handouts that I can pass out to you, or you can access it electronically in our Dropbox folder. The tag of the file is they say, I say, and there's two files tagged that way. You will first see an article about why New York pizza is the best pizza versus somebody else who says, no, Chicago pizza is the best. And if you haven't had either, that's okay. This is going to be a couple articles where you're going to learn a little bit about this very important conversation that Americans have. And you're going to read through these two little articles and try and figure out what are these authors saying in their argument about why one pizza is better than the other. On another handout, there is a little template with some examples about how you might enter into this conversation. What you're going to have to do is represent what those other authors have said, and then bring in your own interpretation, whether you're going to agree with those authors or one author, whether you might agree with the difference, or whether you might disagree and offer a brand new opinion of your own. So what you're going to do is kind of go back and forth between these two handouts. Maybe use this template as an example to kind of give you some ways to talk about your ideas. And then when you feel comfortable, you can talk with some people around you and share your responses. What you feel, what you interpret about this pizza conversation, and how you would represent those ideas to other people. All right, so I'll give you some time for this. If you would like some paper copies to share, I have a few. Otherwise, there's some electronic versions you can access now. So when you've had a chance to read through the two opinions on this topic, you can turn to some of the people around you and work through this little exercise together if you like. What you'll notice on the handout is that you have sort of two main tasks to work on. The first part is going to be figuring out how you summarize what these two people have to say about their preference for pizza. And then the second part is then figuring out your opinion in response. So if you want to kind of go through this template to kind of see how you would move through this conversation, kind of come up with some typical responses you might provide, we'll then talk about it all together and see what you come up with. All right. Don't worry if you haven't finished going through the activity. I'm not giving you a whole lot of time for this, I realize. So why don't we work through some of this together so we can kind of talk about how we figure out all the different things we have to say when we're going through this. So I'll get us started, and I'm going to kind of use some of the language of that first paragraph. When we first start talking about research, we tend to introduce the topic more generally. So in recent discussions of what cuisine to recommend to new international students who have arrived to Kansas State University, controversial issue has been raised whether Chicago pizza is better than New York pizza. So that first sentence is kind of bringing the general discussion of the topic into play. The next step we're going to do is sort of present a more specific idea. So on one hand, some argue that Chicago deep dish pizza is superior to New York pizza. Now what I have to do is kind of provide more detail. And this is where I'll turn to you and kind of see what you got in terms of argument. So how would we kind of fill out the middle of this discussion here? What would you say is that author's main argument for why Chicago pizza is better? We want to share what they've discovered when they were reading.
The size is smaller, so it's handy if you don't really have time to sit and eat.
Perfect. Yes. So the size is perfect for, sitting down and eating or taking it. And that's great. Yeah. What other ways did the author argue for why Chicago pizza deep dish is better than New York? More pizza per slice. Great. So we would say something like, the author suggests that, this is the best way to get the most for your money. You get more pizza per slice, you get more toppings, more things like that. There are other arguments that the author makes in this discussion, and you're not necessarily going to summarize all of them. You might choose what you feel are the most relevant or the most important. What we also now have to do, though, is bring in the other perspective. So in the middle of this discussion, we would say something like, on the other hand, however, others argue that New York pizza is the best and way better than Chicago deep dish pizza. And so here's where, again, we're going to try and go into a bit more detail. In the words of Emilio's, which is a pizza restaurant in New York, they're mentioned in that article. Seems a little biased to me to get a New York pizza restaurant to provide their argument, but we want to kind of represent what they have to say. So what did you get from that discussion? Why are they claiming that New York pizza is better than Chicago?
Very happy.
Very handy. Yeah. Most people in New York take their slice of pizza and fold it in half. And that is what I think they would argue is the best way to eat it. And so the thin pizza, you kind of fold in half and eat it that way. And that makes it easy to kind of eat that way. Yes. So that is one argument that the author presents. What other things did they say when they talked about why New York pizza is better?
The shape.
The shape. Yeah. So the cut shape down in the bottom of the article comes in a round shape. It's sliced and it creates better portion sizes. It's easier for parties, so people can just grab a piece. That makes it better. So again, there are more things we could say. We might pull out what we feel are the most important. And so when we wrap up this discussion, we want to summarize. So in summary, then the issue really comes down to whether people have time, place for certain types of pizza, or whether they have a preference for lots of toppings versus a more efficient way of eating, or whether they're trying to feed a crowd. What we're trying to do here is kind of figure out where the main points of difference are coming in. Now what we have to do is offer our perspective. So we've summarized what they've said. Now we have to talk about what we feel. So don't feel you have to follow the exact template of this paragraph. What I would love to hear from you is how you would offer your own opinion in this conversation. So in general, we can agree with one of the authors, we could agree with a bit of a difference, or we could have a totally different opinion and perspective. So would anybody care to share their experience? If you've had this pizza before, do you have a preference, or kind of if you're learning about it, what do you think?
No, I haven't had any of the two before, but I still think from the article, I don't know whether it's fine or not. I would still go for Chicago pizza because like the monetary value of it is better. Then it has more feelings and the rest. Because all the argument for New York is just about the aesthetic and the shape, so which is nothing. So I'll go for Chicago.
Go for Chicago. You're coming down with a strong opinion. I like that. And I like the way you have now offered an opinion. What you are saying is, I really like the way that the Chicago pizza author is saying, you know, if you really want something that tastes good, that has good ingredients, and you're not just concerned about how food looks, then Chicago sounds great. And, you know, you're offering an opinion and interpretation of what might be flawed or limited about people who are saying New York is better. I think that's a great argument to make. So that's one way to enter into the conversation. Does anybody have different opinions or similar opinions? Has anybody in the room tried both types of pizza before? Has anybody tried one type of pizza before? So a couple of nods there. Okay. Any other opinions that you could offer in this conversation? Yes. Yep. Yes. Yes. So good. Again, what I liked is that you built your argument off of where that their conversation was kind of presenting ideas, as in we started with what they were saying, that if they really focus on something like convenience, and because I feel that matters, it's more about having something on the go, and that's really what I want. I think pizza is good street food where I can eat it on the sidewalk or as I'm walking home. And so because of that, New York pizza makes more sense. So you can have a lot of differing opinions, and all of them will kind of stem from what you're seeing in the research, but you kind of learn how to navigate that and still offer your own perspective. My opinion, not that you're asking for it, is that Chicago and New York pizza are both delicious. And if you get the opportunity to try some, you should. But giving a more practical suggestion for what's available here in Manhattan, I think you need to go down to Aggieville on Tuesdays to Taco Lucha and have a peanut butter taco. And it sounds crazy, but it's delicious. So that is my recommendation. So this is my differing opinion. That's what these guys are saying about pizza, but I'm going to give you a whole new way of thinking about it. So go to Taco Lucha on Tuesdays and get a peanut butter taco. Okay. So thank you for reading through that with me. You're welcome to kind of utilize that template in the future as you're trying to figure out how to get started with thinking about research conversations. There's a lot of things you have to do all in one space when you're talking about ideas and presenting your own. And so that's why something like this, kind of breaking it down into 3 simple approaches, can be a really great way to get started. So there's the template. I'm going to move into our final discussion for today. And the first thing I'm going to do is kind of give you something to do a little bit later. One of the best ways you can start recognizing how other good writers are talking about research is to read, and to get in the habit of reading academic American English papers on a regular basis. And I always tell writers that come to the center to do that kind of every week if they can, even read every day, and to read articles that are coming both from inside their discipline, but also outside of it. It's important to kind of get that perspective too. So inside that folder that I've shared with you on Dropbox, there is a link to an article It is a short literature review, so it's only a few pages long. This is the sample I always give out to new students as kind of a good representative of what strong writing can look like. And what I really like about this article is that it's well organized and it does a really good job of talking about other ideas. It's a literature review, so it has a lot to do to talk about what other people are saying. And it does a really good way, it provides a really good kind of structure to kind of explain what they learned in the research and then how they're interpreting it. And there are a lot of strategies that we talked about today already contained in that article. A good use of strong active voice and good verb placement inside their sentences. So at your leisure, have a look at that sometime. You'll have access to it through that Dropbox link, and kind of get in the habit of reading articles on a regular basis and kind of paying attention to the writing strategies that are being used. You can also ask your major professors, people inside your department, and say, hey, do you have any good writing samples that you can show me? Can you kind of point me in a direction of people that write well in our department and our discipline? And then you probably get even more things that you can take a look at as well. So that's an activity for later, but I think it's really important to recognize that reading is a very important component of getting better at writing in your second or third or fourth, whatever language. All right. So we've talked about rules, we've talked about grammar, we've talked about all of the really complicated things that do take a long time to become acclimated to and to be comfortable with. But you should applaud yourselves for being willing to do it, that you have taken on an academic discipline at a high level in a language that's not your native language. And that's something that you should really be proud of. And we love having your perspective here. But we also recognize that it might take some time to really navigate some of the things that are going to make your writing strong. But this part of our discussion that we're going to take towards the end is more focused on things that you can do even starting today that will help you achieve better results in your writing and will help carry you through your academic careers, your graduate careers, with good habits that will help you to be successful. So we're going to talk a little bit about developing and sustaining or keeping up a writing practice in your life. So in this section, we're going to talk about what that actually means. What does it mean to have a writing practice and why it's important? We're going to talk about common roadblocks or challenges we face to, writing regularly. We're going to talk about some specific strategies that you can try out that can help you develop a consistent and productive writing practice. And then I'll also point you to some resources that can help you with this, including the Writing Center. So first of all, what is a writing practice? This is kind of a very broad term, and it basically refers to anything that helps you get writing started all the way to the finish line. So it has to do with how you organize your time, how you organize the data or the research you're collecting. It also has to do with your personal life, because writing often takes place, outside, off campus, in your home, or in an environment where you feel comfortable. It also involves giving yourself and setting up yourself with an expectation that writing is a priority in your life. Even when your professor has not asked you to turn something in, even when a draft of your dissertation isn't due yet. It's kind of recognizing that writing is important and I'm going to make sure it's a part of my life. It's also about implementing goals for yourself and in a way of measuring those goals so that you can track your writing progress. Most importantly, I always recommend, especially to international students, that you start writing every day. Even just a little bit, doesn't have to be academic, but just writing so that it becomes normal. It becomes a regular part of what you do throughout the day. Why do you need to be doing something like this? You're going to be doing a lot of writing over the course of your graduate careers. It's important to recognize that it does take up a lot of time, and it's probably going to take up more time in the early stages than it will later on, just because you're getting used to what American academic writing looks like. Writing a thesis or dissertation, everybody's going to tell you, requires a lot of self-discipline, requires a lot of organization and time management. You probably heard this discussed already in orientation activities, that it's really hard to kind of keep yourself moving forward when you don't have a good structure and sort of sense of how to manage your time. Your project, whatever you're working on, whether it be master's or PhD, needs to be clear, it needs to be convincing, it needs to be relevant to your discipline, and it's going to have to adhere to those standards of English in American academic English. So your committee is going to assess not just the value of your data, your research, and your ideas, but how well written that document is, if it's going to adhere to the standards we expect here at K-State. So first of all, I would like you to think a little bit about what writing practices you might already have. So just take a minute, you can talk with the people around you, kind of think through some key things. What do you do when you're ready to start writing? Like, what actually happens first? Are you somebody who likes to kind of sit and think? Do you like to scribble ideas down on a piece of paper? Do you like to visually map things out? Do you already spend time daily, weekly doing writing? How much do you tend to write in one sitting? What type of environment is productive for you? Do you like quiet, or do you like lots of kind of white noise around you? Do you write in the morning? Do you prefer to write at night? Think through all these things. Kind of talk to the people around you. There are probably a lot of very different writing practices in the room. Think about some of these questions. You don't have to answer all of them. Talk to each other.
Like I said, like I don't practice that. Like for which I do this, I think if I write something, you tend to write on that one. So even though I do copy, I do the copy. That's
So you're sitting on one page for hours and then you write them from
like my own, like my own notes, like my own small, okay, for the most part, because this is the
I have a big topic.
I don't know.
like this. Yeah.
Sometimes people sometimes we need some kind of feelings.
Now I can elaborate, but I have to write the whole thing in my head. And it's very small
All right. So hopefully you had a chance just to kind of hear a little bit about how different people are productive. I think the pandemic also, caused a lot of people to really think about how they're productive and what works and what doesn't. I in particular write really well in coffee shops where there is lots of white noise, background noise, but nothing too distracting. And I really had to change how I work productively with the pandemic because I couldn't do that as much. So what you can start thinking about are the habits that you already have when you need to get work like writing done. Start to consider what is actually productive for you and what habits could be changed or improved to make things better. Sometimes people thought they were morning people and that it was best for them to write early in the day to get it done, but realize that, you know what, they're not awake, they're not thinking clearly enough, they struggled, they started writing near the end of the day when they felt like the ideas came a little bit more easily. So just being open to thinking about your environment, both on campus and off campus, can be a really important thing to consider to set yourself up for success. We do find that learning rules of writing, grammar, all that kind of stuff is important, but this in particular really does have an impact, which is why I wanted to emphasize it. So a couple of things to think about. Remember that writing is a learned skill and you get better at it the more you do it. So it's like a muscle that you have to keep using to keep it strong. So having a good writing practice is going to help you to keep learning and relearning the skills, learn more of the language and get used to it, and then absorb more of the cultural expectations for writing as well. You're going to encounter challenges, which is why a writing practice, a regular writing practice can kind of help you through. But we know that English fluency is something you're still learning. And so the more you can kind of get some practice on your own, the more comfortable you're going to feel with some of these specific situations. Remember that fluency is achieved gradually. And so being active in your reading and writing is going to help you through this process. And so get into the habit of writing even when it feels like a struggle, even when you feel like you don't understand, because often that is where you are learning how to figure things out. So generally people in my field of writing, when we think about what is it that makes people productive, they all seem to agree that it's important for graduate students to write every day. Even just a little bit. Get ideas down, try not to compartmentalize writing and sort of put it in one stage of your research process, that you save for later. Do it every day, put it into your schedule, and really be consistent about it. Sometimes writing is one of the things we kind of get rid of first because we feel like there are other things that are more important, but you want to treat it like you would any other appointment or class or commitment. Get comfortable with when you are writing every day, it's not going to look perfect. It might look a little bit messy. It might just be those early ideas that you're trying to get down on the page. That's okay. Give yourself lots of goals that you can achieve and that you can reward yourself with when you do achieve them. And don't worry about revising, making your writing better each and every time you write. It's more important just to kind of get ideas down than it is to make them perfect. So there's a few different ways you can set goals. This is where you can start thinking about what makes you productive, what you feel works effective. Some people do really well when they kind of put themselves in a chair and say, I'm not getting up from this chair until I write X number of pages or I've written for this amount of time. Make sure nothing is going to interfere with that, same time, same place, but you kind of need to just put yourself in one spot and stay there. Some people don't work quite as well that way. They kind of think more about sitting down when they feel creative and giving themselves a goal for a certain number of ideas, making sure that they reflect on those things and are kind of building off of the moments when they feel most creative. Other people prefer just setting particular goals, as in they need to read and write a set number of pages per day. That's something that comes in real handy at dissertation time when you're like, I have a lot of stuff I need to get through, so I'm going to make sure that every day I write 5 pages. That gives you something concrete to work towards. So these are all different goals. You'll have to figure out what works best for you and for your productivity. One thing that is really, really helpful and that previous graduate students have told us has been one of the most impactful things in keeping their writing consistent and strong is setting up a writing group That is people that you can meet up with on a regular basis that will hold you accountable, that will help you along the way, that are going through the same things that you are and trying to get their writing done. And so I highly recommend either within people you're meeting from the international student groups or people within your own discipline or department, find people that you can create some of these groups with and make plans to write on a regular basis. You can also take turns reading each other's work and giving people feedback, because having that perspective from another person is so important when you're working on something. And so writing groups can be a really, really great way to build community, and so you don't feel like you're alone when you have to work on your writing all the time. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Get support. Find people that will help you. People on campus that can give you feedback on everything from grammar to those big picture ideas of your dissertation or your thesis. The Association for Support for Graduate Students here in North America is also a great resource if you would like more help that way. And then here at the Writing Center, we love working with graduate students on whatever it is that you have to work on. We will give you feedback on everything from clarity to organization to sentence structure. But we are trained to kind of give you the help you need at whatever stage of writing you're at. So if you haven't utilized or seen our Writing Center yet here on campus, we're over in the English and Counseling Services building. It's one small building right next to Hale Library. And we have in-person as well as online appointments that you can utilize. All right. So I'm going to wrap things up just by recommending and encouraging you that investing your time and energy into your writing skills is going to really pay off. And there are also a lot of people here on campus that would love to help you. And so don't ever hesitate to reach out, to ask for support, and to tell others about your experience as an international student, because I think it's important for native speakers here on campus to also hear what you are bringing to this conversation, to the research conversation, through your own cultural expectations for writing. So with that, I will end just by showing you that if you want to learn more, because we've just kind of gotten started today with our conversation, these are my favorite resources for graduate students trying to get through all the writing they need to do in their programs. I think a lot of them are available at Hale Library, but you can also access them electronically through other means as well. All right. So Megan, before she talked about how there are a couple of other writing events that are coming up, if you want to keep up the momentum and kind of come and see us again at another point in the semester. And so I will highlight the two that are coming up that you'll be interested in. That's the one you did today, so thank you for being here. September 13th, we have a more general graduate level writing workshop. Some of the same content that I talked about today is going to be discussed there too, but we're going to talk about different things as well. So you can come and feel like you're getting a good refresher as well as some new information. But what I really wanted to highlight is this one happening at the end of September. We are going to launch a graduate school writing group. And so over in the Eisenhower building, there will be a space that will be set up for you to come at any point during that time period to write, to bring your ideas, to chat with people and kind of form a writing group. We'll have snacks and you'll have one set place in your calendar where you can come and get some stuff done. I will be there. I'm also going to be bringing some graduate student writing consultants from the Writing Center. So you can also come and ask for some feedback and show us what you're working on, and we can work with you on that. But yeah, given that I've said writing groups are such an important component of being successful, we wanted to set one up for you. So you're welcome to check us out to register for it. I would love to see you there. But in the meantime, please know that we are here as advocates for you, and we wish you the best on this writing journey here. Thank you today. Thank you very much. And I'll stick around if you have questions after.